Welcome to the Bushi Jutsu Ryu. My name's Craig. I'm one of the chief instructors for the school. And yeah, this is a full-time, fully equipped dojo based in Tipton. We train in Okinawan karate. Is the easiest way to identify what we do.
Okay, sweet. So now I'll ask you questions. So what's the difference between Okinawan karate and the karate that most people are practicing in the area?
The primary karate schools in our local area, particularly in Tipton, are all Shotokan-based schools. Most of the karate instructors that are currently teaching are former students of one of our locally famous karateka, SENSEI John Flavel, who was well known for being ridiculously tough and a fantastic coach. You won't hear many people who have bad words to say about him as a martial artist and instructor. Our karate differs slightly in its approach. The Okinawan approach, generally speaking, is a little bit more practical leaning. The lesson formats are more relaxed in the terms of we don't have lessons solely consisting of lines of people marching to a count, which is the very militaristic post-World War II Shotokan that is sort of propagated worldwide now. Within the realm of our karate, we explore a lot more in terms of nagewaza, newaza, and the kobudo practices as well that are sort of inherent in karate as a whole, but have been sort of overlooked for years.
What do you think are the most overlooked things in most karate dojos nowadays? What do you think the main issue is, and what's not being taught?
The main issue, that's an easy one. It's self-protection. Ultimately, karate, as far as anyone's really aware, karate was a means to protect yourself should you come under danger in any way, shape or form. With that said, it's a little bit more than that as well, because you have different instructors, different styles of teaching from decades ago that created or formalised their systems for the times that they lived in. So the biggest problem you've got now is taking systems that are 70, 80 plus years old and further back, and being able to make them practical and useful to the modern realm of violence, which is a whole different ballgame, particularly when you look at different countries as well. Violence is inherent in most cultures. Everywhere around the world has its own violence, but if you look at, let's say, the difference between getting into a scrap as a child, like say when I was a kid, if I got into a scrap on a playground, it's very different to somebody threatening to stab me for the change in my pocket. So trying to take the karate and its principles at heart and make them useful is probably the biggest thing that's not broached.
And do you think now more clubs are becoming more on board with what's going on? More clubs are trying to be more focused more now on practical defence over these past few years, rather than marching up and down the hall doing basics?
I think there's always been, well, I mean, probably as long as I've been alive. I'm only 33 years old. So as long as I've been alive, there's been changes in martial arts over time. If you go really far back to, let's have a look, what sources did I read as a teen when I was working through my Q grade? So I read a lot of Jeff Thompson stuff when I was a kid, you know, which is sort of standard reading for anybody studying the realms of violence, particularly in the UK, because it's very easy to, as somebody from England, to relate to, you know, another Brit. But if you look at the works of Jeff Thompson, and then on from there, if you look at the works of Ian Abernethy, he was one of the first, you know, outspoken and quite well published pioneers for practical bunkai, you know, as well as the likes of, like, say, Pat McCarthy and folks like that. I think over the past, it's probably been going on for about the past 20 years or so, this sort of change into bringing our old systems up to date. You know, you've still got the very staunch, it's okay as it is, we were all a lot tougher in the 80s crowd, and the now quite progressive and, dare I say, more educated crowd saying, well, actually no, it wasn't better then, and scientifically this is why. This is a better way to train. So I think the change has been going on for a while, but it's now sort of starting to bloom a lot more. You know, you've got very prominent figures such as John Johnston, Simon Oliver, Steve Lowe, who are now really pushing that practical karate and its usefulness a lot more, which is nice to see, to be honest.
And do you think yourself that pushing the message of practical karate needs to be more sort of put out there? I mean,
yeah, I do. I think that the major problem karate has as a whole is, generally speaking, karate itself is laughed at because of the generally, dare I say, low skill level of the majority of its practitioners when you compare that with other martial arts and martial sports. If you take a basic karateka from an average Shotokan school, for example, who has maybe a year's worth of training, and then compare them to an amateur boxer who's got a year's training, 9 times out of 10 that boxer's actually got the edge combatively in a violent street altercation, because they will have done more aggressive full contact training that prepares them for somebody coming at them with intent to cause harm. And that's where particularly traditional schools of karate, I won't say all of them lack it, but there is a lot of realism missing in that respect, you know.
So what areas do you cover in your dojo?
As many as I can, to be honest. Our school has that traditional side to things where we practice and hone our basic skills, but we will also implement the application of those skills, and not just the individual techniques but the principles behind techniques. So the science behind bunkai, behind that disassembly of your kata and what it's useful for, and not just finding your oil in there, but finding the base principles that make the oil work, taking that and making it useful is probably the core component to our karate. And generally exploring. Our school's never been afraid to change things if it's not working. If we have a tradition that's detrimental to the continued growth of the art of the school, we'll examine it as much as possible to see what's useful from it. And if there's no use, or we can find something else to demonstrate, you know, X technique or X principle better, we'll discard whatever that practice is for whatever's better, which is essentially what karate originally was. It was people taking different things from different people and making it suit themselves and their students or the people that they trained with. And that's primarily what's been lost over time for the sake of what I call a hollow tradition. Okay, so today's video we're going to be looking at bunkai, more specifically the process of bunkai itself. So rather than this is bunkai to a part of a kata, which is usually wrong when you say it like that anyway, what I'm going to explain is my process of dissecting a kata and the various stages that I will go through to end up with a somewhat useful technique or principle that I can use from a section of the kata. The kata that we're going to use today will be Kihon, because just about everybody who's walked into a dojo and lasted more than a few weeks has probably learned, or at least tried to follow along with, Kihon kata. So we'll have a look at a couple of sections in that, and the Bunkai process, the Shuha and Ri process, hopefully along the way with it. Kihon. Right, so you'll normally be taught at any karate dojo a very foundation level IO application, which would be something similar to this. You partner in yourself, you'd be in your dash. Partner would step back into Zenku stance again. Back. From there, they'd lunge punch to the stomach, and you'd start normally with your own Gerenbarai, and then you would step and punch from there, and that would be considered an application. A block and a return punch, or a block and return punch on the spot. It's all basically the same kind of thing, which is fine. However, stepping back and blocking for a start misses the first movement in the kata. In Kihon, you wouldn't start by stepping back into your Gerenbara. You would step, or at least I step towards. So if we were to turn that into a linear situation, I'd be going into my opponent rather than away from my opponent, which actually suits a Gerenbara a lot more. And there's a ton that you can go into, but as a do level application, it may be more prominent to look at, rather than just stopping an attack and returning fire, looking at the way you're moving. So if we'll have a slow attack, please. So at a do level, when you are first looking at kata, you'll normally work with a very compliant partner anyway, because it's a tool of research. We're not doing this is a self-defense move. This is a tool for research. So from a very neutral position here, if my partner attacks towards me, I'm more likely to step towards my partner, okay? From this position, I have the option then to explore and play, which is what Bunkai is about. So in the kata, I start with a Gerenbara. My next movement is a lunge punch. So from here, I can say, well, a lunge punch from this particular position could well be me pulling this in nice and tight. This would be my hikite movement. And my lunge forward could potentially be a, almost like an iriminage, okay? Which would be that. That's a possibility. And depending on where I step, could change the dynamics of that application. So what we have, if you just give me your arm for example, where I'd step just was so that I was on the outside of your leg, and I stepped to the inside of your body, moving through. There's nothing saying that I couldn't stop this here and then step past, which would help the throw probably more. So already we're starting to look at how we step. So we have that half moon step in our kata. We could work on the inside. So if I've got the attack coming in towards my stomach, I could work on the inside here, which would allow me to stabilise. Or I could use, rather than one step there, I could come to the outside here and then use that step this way to assist in the throw. So you're still doing a downward sweeping movement and lunging forward with a punch, essentially. So that's what we would consider to be a do application. And that's a small couple of variations. So rather than we move to in and past, and to smoothen that up, it will look something like when attack's coming in, we move here, we move here. There's no realism in it. Nobody's ever going to be here and then go, haha, I'm not going to do. But it allows us to start thinking about how we move, not so much how they move. We have a script, we improvise with the script that we're given. So that's it, that's your do application. And it allows you to, if you look at shu, ha, ri, it allows you to almost rigidly stick with the basic movements that are in the kata, without deviating from that basic set structure. You are still sweeping downwards and lunging forwards. So we're still in that shu stage. And that's it for the do application. So moving on from do, we now have, in our school, we work in three different levels: do, jitsu and jutsu. I'm not an expert on Japanese language, so I could be completely wrong, and if anyone wants to correct me, that's fine. But as it was explained to me, do is foundation. Jitsu means technique. So you're going from a foundation form to almost a freer form technique. Jutsu, we use that term to mean science, so it's the science behind the form and the technique. So at that point you're working with principles rather than set techniques. So for our Jitsu level application, we start to add in more of what our body's doing, and we can also add in a different method of aggression from our partner. So the demonstration I'll do first, we'll do from a lunge punch, and then we'll shorten it down to something slightly different so it looks less messy on camera, I think is the best way to say it. So if I have a partner who's going to lunge punch towards my stomach, for this I'm going to move in against that lunge punch, okay? From there, my step and punch now becomes a step in with a knee to the groin, either get it to the groin or possibly even the body. The lunge punch itself is me extending my arm past my opponent to either grab whatever clothing they've got, but ultimately to take control of the head. So if I just turn you around for this one, please, mate. As that attack comes in, I enter my opponent, sweeping that arm out of the way, at the same time stepping in with this strike here to bring this head down. From this position, I'm now going to perform the next part of the kata, which is to look back, to step and block, and then step and punch. For that, I've got my opponent in this position. If I need more compliance from my opponent, I've got it whenever I need it, here, okay, as well as here. So I'm going to turn my hikite in this position as I step through, is pulling the head towards my hip. This arm is going to lever my opponent's arm up and pass this way. I step back to make space whilst pushing his arm across his shoulder. And if you've got someone wearing a gi, it's fantastic because this stitch line that normally runs across the back can be used as your guide. You're going to push their arm along that line as you turn. And that becomes your second punch. So pulling the head down and moving out of the way becomes the block. stepping and punching is you finishing the kata nage, which is a pin throw. So the attack comes in, we take that out of the way, hit here, pull. Obviously from there, if you need it, you've got the ability to step or stamp on your opponent. I wouldn't advise stepping or stamping on or towards anyone's head. Purely because if you're in anywhere where there's other people, you're likely to be on film in this day and age, and you know everyone's got a camera. In the UK, if you stamp or kick towards someone's head and they're on the floor and you're not on the floor, that's now considered attempted murder. You're trying to kill that person on the ground. The morality and justification can be argued as much as you want, but the law is black and white in that respect. If you've tried to stamp on someone or kick them in the head on the floor, you're breaking the law because you are demonstrably trying to kill that person. So at the very least, it's attempted murder, attempt at manslaughter, okay? So be very careful in that respect. That same technique now, we'll switch around again, mate. That same technique again. This time we can then, after we've established that we can do the technique, bam, 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 and the throw, we can then shorten it down, change the method of attack, and explore the principle behind that movement. So, kata nage is fantastic because it's applicable at a number of different ranges. So what we could have is our opponent is very close, okay? And from this position, they may have, you know what, I'm not even going to touch knives and the practicalities of that yet. So they may have a grip, trying to pull you in for a strike, okay? Now, the downward sweep here obviously isn't going to help if he's trying to punch you in the head, okay? However, the first part of your get and barrow, if I just slip out there a second, is here, okay? So you've pulled to here and pushed down to there, okay? So we can adapt that to suit us. If he's grabbing me, he's pulling this up towards my head, this here has now become a covering strike, which then allows me to pull that arm down here. Ideally, though, I don't want to be on the outside, I want to be on the inside, so I'll hit here, covering my head, and I'll then take control of the arm by coming underneath. Here, okay? In this position then, this arm, rather than trying to lunge forward, is more or less trying to create space, because he's still got hold of me with this arm, which means if I give him a good shot in the pills, he's going to hang on to me for dear life. So I want to create this bit of space to help correct my posture, okay? So from this position, I can hit as many times as I want, really, because I haven't got to worry about this arm, because he's not trying to hit me with it, he's hanging on. From that position, I can then pull this arm up and over, which then allows me to complete the technique. It's a bit messier, but it should be. Any karate, even as you work through these stages, shouldn't be crisp and clean. If anything, it should get progressively more messy, but allow you to reach a point of finishing your opponent, or at least flooring your opponent to facilitate an escape. So, for that one to work, our opponent had taken a grip and attempted to hit. So I'll use the start of my get and barrow now to cover. So I've changed tack. As that arm's coming towards me, I want the arm coming towards me because if his arm's back there, I've got no chance. I've not got all this time here to sit like this though, because if our opponent's hit me once and I haven't done this correctly, he's going to pull his arm back, he's probably going to try and hit me again and again and again. So what I need to do is, as soon as I've covered here, I'm already trying to work. And it will be messy. It ain't going to work 10 times out of 10, nothing ever does. But the main thing is that I can get that hit, or some kind of hit, to get him down to here. And then the principle becomes that turn and switch. which doesn't require too much in the way of effort. So, again, we've now moved on from, so don't worry too much about the technique itself. I'm sort of going on the fly with that, if anything. The point I'm trying to get to is you go from a stop a strike, return a strike, to accept a strike, and use posture break for a takedown, possibly. Which goes from stop a strike to a takedown. So you've gradually moved through Do to Jitsu, and then you start to close that that gap between something that is impossible to apply in any practical situation to something that, if the circumstances dropped perfectly right and all the stars aligned, would possibly work in your favour. So we've now gone from Do and Shu, rigidly sticking to the kata, to Jitsu and Ha, where we start to deviate slightly. I'm still using an enter, a lunge, a turn, and a lunge. But now I'm not doing it to that 1, 2, 3, 4 count. It changes drastically. So now we'll move from that Jitsu point of view to a more Jutsu point of view. So we'll now take it from its technical aspect to as not realistic, because even in my opinion at Jutsu level, when it comes to Bunkai, Bunkai is not there for you to go at the end, here is an infallible application. Bunkai gets you to a principle. You then take that principle and then start to apply it to different scenarios to see how you can apply it in terms of violent confrontation. So we're now going to look at your more Jutsu leveled application. Okay? So moving on from the very Do version and the Jitsu version of a technique, we then move on to the more Jutsu version of the technique, which gives us ultimately the principle that we want to work with. The principle behind, in this instance, I'm using KATA Naga as an example, that pinwheel throw. So for our more Jutsu versions of our techniques, again, we start slow, so you have to remember you're still in a Bunkai process, so you're still exploring, but now it's more prudent to explore what your opponent's reactively going to be doing in that scenario. So we'll stick with the grab and strike because it's a fairly common form of attack. I'm using a based strike. It could well be, I mean, you see a lot of lapel grabbing and stuff like that in all manner of martial arts schools. It is fairly common, but there's slightly different factors that sort of come into play with that as well then. So for the purposes of this one, I'm going to use a grab across the head, base in the head for a strike this way. So as we'd explored previously, our opponent's pulling us this way, so I can't really get that way anyway. And I was going to use Genbao as my initial opener. So for this one, my opponent's trying to punch towards my head, and I covered, and then I sort of came to try and control that arm. Now what you'll notice just now is what I was hoping he was going to do before, which was as soon as he hit my arm and I was covered, he just pulled his arm back, which means normally he's going to try and punch me again. So if we start to think more pragmatically, more scientifically, do I want to give my opponent the opportunity to punch me a second time in the head? The answer is no, because the more opportunities he has to hit me in the head, the more risk there is to him, because eventually he's going to hit me in the head. Probability says if he tries enough times, one of those times he'll hit me in the head. And I don't want any hits in the head. So to prevent myself getting hit in the head, I'm not going to cover specifically now. My cover is now a reactive strike here. So as soon as he's grabbed and he's pulling me and my attack in. So the start to my Gedabarai, which is a cover, is effectively a strike across here. Okay? The difficulty I have now is turning that elbow strike into a useful follow-up. Okay? So we turn this into a KATA nail. Easiest way to do that, as soon as he goes in and I go in with my strike, I'm not hanging around here, I'm immediately pulling this down and away. My sweep down has put him in this position. So we've sort of reverted back to our original do, where my first Gedabarai is actually the opening salvo to finish. And my knee strike and throw happen to throw my opponent to the floor. So we've taken completely out the need for that first half. Why? Well, I don't need it really. All I need to be able to do is cover and twist his head round. That's it. So as soon as he grabs and pulls, that's fantastic. I'm working in here. Elbow up, that's your initial cover where you get a barrow, then bring that head down. His arm's already there, which is brilliant news for you. His other arm, if he does want to try and hit you with it, he's not hitting a fat lot apart from maybe your leg. He's going to struggle to reach anywhere sensitive on myself without me getting him first. Not to mention the fact that if I feel like it, I can tie his head up into a sort of guillotine with extra rotation, which is actually where we're going to move to now. So in this position here, I'm actually going to wrap his head this way. Now, the effectiveness of a guillotine can vary depending on person to person. So I'm not going to drop control of this arm and this bit of control on posture, just for the chance to strangle him a little bit. What I may do though is squeeze this in nice and tight. So can I just turn you around there a bit, mate? Thank you. So what I may do is squeeze this in nice and tight, causing a neck crank. Okay. So what then happens is, as he's grabbed, my elbow here pulled him down into this position. His immediate response at this point is probably going to be to try and get my arm off him, which he ain't going to do because I pulled this in nice and tight. If I want to be horrible, I'll hold on to the belt of my own trousers, which at the minute's fantastic because I've got an Obi on. But even if not, I'll grab onto the waistline of my trousers, jeans, whatever. From here, I'm going to keep this in tight as I push this over. So at this point, I push that, step in, let him fall, whilst pulling this way. So the actual damage at that point, in the principle, is caused by the hikite, not the punch. The punch is an assistance to get him to fall over. So if we're in that position again, I took this here. The punch here assists the posture break to get him into a position where his entire body weight's going to fall to the ground. Comfortable there, mate? No. And I'm going to pull that up this way. And they say hikite's for show, or some people say it's a secret to the universe. Yeah. It's the same as the number 42. So at that point, we're at what I would consider our jutsu principle. We've moved completely away from the kata's basic form and a technique that we sort of fell into by practicing that very basic takedown first. So we've arrived at jutsu, but we've not arrived at ri yet. So ri means to ascend past, completely, almost disregard the whole of the kata. When we use shuharin in terms of kata, it means to throw all that away and make it your own. We're not quite there yet. We're still sort of at the ha stage. So we are not rigidly conforming. We are still exploring and changing to suit ourselves. We really would actually come after this stage of Bunkai, where we then begin to pressure test the technique. So at that point, we're not going to do it today because I only get punched in the head a lot, which will happen. At that point, you may put some gloves on, maybe a head guard, although I personally don't agree with the use of gloves and head guards because of the more recent research coming out now concerning CTE and repeated trauma to the head. But you may reach a point where if James is given the opportunity to grab, he's repeatedly trying to strike at my head. And he may start slow, so I'm here covering while he's trying to hit, and I'm looking for this opportunity here, and it becomes almost like a scramble. At the point I get my advantage, that's when that come in handy. But it wouldn't look as clean as that, and that's messy. And then you build up to the point where you add verbal aggression into it, which is something that is lacking massively in all martial arts. There's one example, well, one person who sets a fantastic example is a guy called John Titchen, who runs a load of practical self-defense programs. And one of the things that he does, that I've seen him do, is he'll do training days. So he's got his students or whoever's turning up for these training days. They're dressed in really nice suits of gear that are designed to absorb the impact. And he'll set up a scenario like a bar or whatever, and he will lay out the scenario. So you've got the practitioners essentially playing the roles of aggressors, victims, and whatever. And he'll record what they do, how they respond to the verbal. So you have not just what was just demonstrated there, which was essentially silent technique, but you have that verbal component. So you've got a person shouting, swearing aggressively at you, and responding in kind, because standing here exchanging blows with absolutely no verbal at all is completely unrealistic. With that said, we'll have a dojo full of children and allow them to be shouting and swearing at one another. No, because I don't think it's appropriate. With that said, will I have them using things like Kihon to reinforce the use of Kihon practically? Yeah, I will, because it's a good way to do it. So at our Jutsu stage, what we've done is we've used that practical principle, or a principle that I believe can be used practically. And we've reached a point where we've got resistance to a degree to allow us to learn the technique. So what you saw there, that grab and turning that into a throw, you're still doing it with some compliance. I mean, for a start, my partner's doing what I tell him to do. I'm saying, please grab me and then try and punch me in the head repeatedly, and I'm going to do this. You have no idea what's going to happen, so you can't script for every scenario or every response. So where am I going with this? What if Les Bunkai recently put a public post out on his Facebook page. I like following Les because he's very smart, and he likes to challenge people's normal ideals of karate, and he was on about the what if crowd. So you've got various crowds of people when it comes to martial arts videos. You will have crowds of people that go, that's a nice technique, well done. Then you'll have people that go, that won't work on the street, and swear at you. Then you'll have a crowd of people that will just insult you for no reason whatsoever, because welcome to the internet. And then you'll have a bunch of people that say, well, what if your opponent does this instead of what you've demonstrated? And you can play the what if game all day. That's actually part of KATA Bunkai. You play what if. So if Sensei James has grabbed my head here, what if he don't want to punch me in the head? What if he's got a knife and he wants to stab me? Chances are, if I've not seen it coming, I'm probably going to get stabbed. Is the reality. But yeah, what if? Don't shy away from what if, but that's not what this video is for, specifically. But embrace what if. That's what KATA Bunkai is for. So if Sensei James, if I gave him a very vague instruction, Sensei James, grab me. What if he grabbed me like that? How am I supposed to demonstrate? How am I supposed to demonstrate the principle at that point? And the answer is you're not. Okay? That's actually a really good demonstration of it. I wasn't expecting you to hug me so kindly. But you, when you are working your way through Bunkai, keep saying what if. But don't let what if derail you, because at that middle stage, Henka, okay? At that Henka stage where you add variety to a basic IO application, that's where you can derail and end up missing the principle. So you end up with a bunch of different techniques that actually don't stick in your head, and you never get to the principle. And while we're on the subject of IO and Henka, we work in threes a lot in my dojo and in our school. So we have IO, application, Henka, variation, and then what we call Kakushiwaza, which should mean hidden technique. But strictly speaking, it's not anything mysterious. It's the little strikes, pokes, dirty fighting that you can put in between what you're doing. So if Sensei James has got me, you know what, we'll go for that grab at the back of the head, okay? So if Sensei James has got me and I want to apply the same application that I just did, the Kakushiwaza would be a strike here at the same time as here. Because when I'm doing get a barrel, one arm goes down and one arm comes up. That could be a strike there as well as a strike here, okay? Is that going to do masses of damage? No. Will it do something? Yes, I ain't going to go into that today, but there's Kakushiwaza there. When I roll this round here, okay, and as I demonstrated before, my step through was a knee. That could be considered Kakushiwaza. As we step through with the throw here, from this position, as my opponent is leaning over, Kakushiwaza here could be a strike down as I fall back, or it could be the grab that allows me to pull that off. Small things like that, eye pokes, striking within striking, and sort of checking certain body parts to ensure that you are at minimal risk can all be considered Kakushiwaza. It's difficult to explain and describe, particularly with that technique anyway. There's probably far better suited progressions of techniques that I could describe that with. But today I wanted to look specifically at Kihon and its opening moves, because we all do them, we all essentially know them, but we move on from them so quick, and there's actually a lot there. So to summarise and recap, we have a do application. We rigidly follow the pattern of the kata, so we're still doing a sweep with a step and lunge. Then we move on from that to our jitsu stage, where we shorten the movements down a bit, and rather than it being hit, we actually used more motion with the rest of the kata, and added in that nice little kaita nage throw. At our jutsu stage, we then sort of stripped away the need for that second half of our jitsu application, and actually went back shortened it down, compressed it, and made the first part more useful. And very much not like the kata at all, in terms of we were covering and striking rather than trying to get a block. It was more like a grab and pull to enable the throw. And as I explained, even then, that's still not at a point where it's perfectly suited for practical application. Then, once you've got that technique to work the principle from, the principle being leverage on the head and shoulder region, which is taking this past its normal plane of movement to cause a posture disruption, to cause a throw. That's the principle in there. It's then you would have to take that and then pressure test it. So putting some gloves on and working it against an aggressor, and then escalating the levels of aggression that you're using safely and ideally under instruction. So if you have just 2 people, it's not really that useful. You should at least have a third to keep an eye on what's going on so no one gets injured, and that there's minimal risk to both parties, okay? I think that sort of covers just about everything. I've probably missed a load of stuff because I didn't really plan for it. So yeah, hopefully that gives you sort of an idea on how at least the Bushi Jutsu Ryu approaches Bunkai. If it's useful to you, fantastic. If it's not, okay, let me know what I could do better. If you're fairly local to me, come and visit my dojo. My dojo is open most days of the week. If you get in touch, I can make the dojo open so you can come along, and hopefully what I'd like to do, what I'd like to get from these videos is interaction with people. We're now moving post-COVID in the UK, so I would like to see more people. I'd like people to visit me. I'd like the opportunity to visit other people, see how other people train and what they do, and hopefully over time develop more videos, more footage, maybe even video. We'll go and visit other people's places if they're happy with this video. That'd be quite cool, I think. So yeah, any feedback would be appreciated, rather than the usual rhetoric of that wouldn't work on the street. Because yeah, I know. Well done for pointing out the obvious. So yeah, hopefully you found this informative. Any feedback's appreciated. And yeah, thanks for viewing the video and coming to the dojo. Thanks Sensei James for being okay and helping with the whole project. Appreciate it. So.